Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles to Angelo Robles' Effective Family Office podcast, where I look to distill the best practices and best ideas of the world's most successful families and their family offices. I hope to provide thought-provoking opinions and feature amazing thought leaders to our listeners of the podcast with an eye towards the future of the family office. Today's podcast is titled Family Office Fire Drill, What If Scenarios, Disaster Planning, with a subtitle or focus on key person medical emergency planning, kind of the family enterprise response. So what this is in consultancy circles is known as a tabletop exercise. And we're going to get a definition of that and an overview from our wonderful participants. And we have a lot today. We have three. I'll introduce them very, very shortly. But I wanted to emphasize how important this kind of discussion is, because we're seeing it play out right now. A black swan, a disaster, a what-if scenario. And of course, that being COVID-19, not only a health challenge, especially potentially to older principals, which will be somewhat of a case study focus today, and you're really going to like it. We have real professionals on that are going to do an overview of that. But how the family and the workers in the family office effectively, especially in the big cities, New York, San Francisco, need to be dispersed. So it's making people remote, and that's putting pressure on standards, technologies, how people communicate, and on policy and procedures. So those of you that are a direct family member, or those of you that are an executive in a family office, or those of you that may service the community, this is incredibly important to realize that at the end of the day, the family is already really, really rich. They probably want to stay that way. So one of the greatest threats to them are black swan or other disastrous events. Now, we've covered some of it from more of a financial angle in many of our podcasts, and that's always a great subject. That's not going to be as much the focus of today. It's going to be more focused on things like medical, operational, and these are really the nuts and bolts of many family and family offices. It gets overlooked way, way too much. And this is an exercise that the family is usually the one, because of their grave concerns over what-if scenarios, that would bring up to an outside advisor, for lack of a better word, that would then loop in the family office and they work together. But we are seeing a trend to more progressive leaders in family offices understanding that no matter how good they are, we all get a little siloed. We all have blind spots. The best athletes in the world, going back to watching the ESPN special on Michael Jordan that's been occurring, we all have coaches, athletic coaches, strength coaches, nutrition coaches, Tiger Woods, I could go on and on. So having another set of eyes to be a resource and understand how you could go from good to great, great to exceptional, and exceptional to maybe world level elite. If you want to make a career in this industry and be the best that you could be of service to the family, this is a mutually beneficial exercise. It is not a gotcha exercise to the SFO executive. That's an SFO executive that would have an ego, not have a beginner's mindset, and not really be of service to the family. Luckily, that's pretty rare. Most people are good and want to get better and realize that we could all use a little bit of another set of eyes to be of value and help in that. On that note, I am going to introduce our guest, Gemma Leddy, CPA, partner in charge, PKF O'Connor Davies, family office practice. Also, Mark Rinaldi, CPA, partner in charge, financial services, PKF O'Connor Davies, LLP. Boy, we got the big hitters from the firm today, and they're a wonderful, very significant and large national firm. And I'm joined by my friend, Phil Strassler, President and CEO of Strassler Associates. Everyone, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Angelo.
Thank you, Angelo.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to all have you here. Gemma, what I may do is, although I gave a relatively comprehensive overview, why don't we kick it off to you to give maybe a little bit deeper, specific to what a tabletop exercise is. And, in today's world, we have a real situation with COVID-19 to actually share some case studies, which we're going to get to very, very shortly. But I think it's important layering on top of what I said to give a foundation of what we're covering today.
Yes, thank you, Angelo. The purpose of this exercise for any family is really to be able to effectively plan for these type of events. And I will tell you, just from my experience, especially in the last number of weeks, no one is really prepared for these events that we're dealing with today, that really cover so many aspects of our lives and impact our operations, our investments, our way of communication, and our relationships, and just not being able to see and communicate with family effectively. So that, combined with our experiences working with families and dealing with emergency situations of key people, it's really something that we found is really important that families address, and that every business organization addresses, is really the tabletop exercises designed to really identify what are the key questions and issues that you need to ask, and what do you need to put in place surrounding an emergency event that impacts a key family office personnel, a key person within the family office. So this exercise was really designed to provide case studies that really could be typical situations that we're all dealing with today.
Excellent. And to give a little bit of a flow of what we're going to do, very shortly, we're going to begin 2 case studies. So this is really the first time in 9 weeks of daily meetings and often podcasting that we've done this kind of format. So a treat for many of you is I get to sit back and watch and learn and not talk as much. And we have some, again, wonderful participants today that are going to lead us through not 1, but 2 case studies that, again, yes, are going to be admittingly a little more focused, what's going to sound initially on the medical side via COVID-19, and that's true. But again, it gets much deeper than that to the family enterprise, the family office being dispersed, remote, the importance of processes, policy, and procedures. And again, these are all things that sometimes family offices could be a little weaker on and really need to get better. Like I said earlier, the irony to much of COVID-19 is that it's kind of pushing many people to do changes that they should have done, of course, a long time ago. But we all get busy, we all procrastinate. And the good news that I'm hearing from people maybe more in my age bracket and older is, hey, a lot of these communication protocols, Slack, Microsoft Team, project management, in the cloud stuff, it's really not that hard. I should have done this years ago. I agree. So sometimes it takes something like this to push you into it. So again, this is an opportunity to get better. I'll say a couple of words about Phil, who initially was a very well-known accountant globally in the alternative investments and family office community, and really is a masterful consultant working directly with families and select others now. And he's probably going to have the most interaction during the case studies, given his experiences. So this is a chance for me to do a little bit of a different type of meeting, type of podcast. I think you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be a little different, and it's going to be incredibly valuable, really demonstrating how to plan, how to implement, how to communicate with family members and the family office advisors. You know, it says here during medical emergency, but really during a variety of emergencies and disasters and what if scenarios that really could occur. On that note, Gemma, I'm going to leave it to you to kickstart how you would like to begin the first case study, and I'll let you all interact. I may chime in here or there, but for the most part, I want you guys to really run with it and take the lead. It's all yours.
Great. So I'm going to lay out the first case study. What are the facts that we're assuming in this situation? And then we'll go through the different aspects and questions that should be addressed in this exercise. So the first case study is the Meade family in this family has a formal family office structure. It has the 75-year-old first-generation wealth creator who has three children in their 40s and a third generation with 5 children who are less than 15 years old. The wealth creator runs an existing operating business, pretty much very much involved without an heir apparent. And the family owns diverse investments, multiple homes, has many investment counterparties, and multiple direct business investments. John Meade, the wealth creator and the person we're talking about, he also runs the family office and a private foundation. One of his daughters, Julie, runs the private foundation with her mother, together with her mother, and interfaces with their father in the family office matters. There is an outsourced virtual family office in place, which handles a lot of the day-to-day financial management, compliance matters, reporting, and interfaces with advisors. And that's a key relationship that the family relies on a daily basis. The key relationship partner at the family office is Laura Wyeth, and she's been working with the family for a number of years. The outsourced wealth creator, John Meade, catches COVID in this scenario. He's in the hospital for a month and succumbs to the disease. Advisors, there are existing group of advisors, including legal, accounting, and tax advisors, and multiple investment managers and advisors as well. So this pretty much is the outline of the scenario. And what we want to do is kind of go through the different components and decide what are the things that need to be done to really create a plan and respond to this emergency. And one of the key items would be to really establish a crisis or emergency team. And given the scenario that we have in place, we have basically we have a family office key person that is involved in the day-to-day and has a lot of knowledge, that woman, Laura Wyeth from the outsourced accounting firm, who probably will play a big role. But we need to really figure out who are the other people that should be on the crisis management team. What is the role of the team? How would they assemble such a team? And what are the necessary skill sets of the team? So those are the immediate questions that you would start with to determine how to go about this process. In this situation, it's important to understand what are the key items that need to be involved, and who are the people in play. Are there existing leaders in the family that can assist in this process? What are the gaps of the person who is incapacitated? So John Meade has played a very significant role in the family office, in the family business, in the day-to-day operations. So we have to understand, what do we need to do to respond to that gap, both in the immediate situation and in the future, and who are the people that could pick up that those roles, and how many people would it be? It could be a combination of different people that could help out with there. What are the skill sets needed? Do these people have the experience, time, and resources to be able to address the situation? And how would the event impact their ability to participate in this exercise? So if it's a family member, how would they be able to participate and be on the crisis team? They may not be the right people. You may need to have step back and look at advisors and attorneys and so forth to determine that.
So Gemma, in your experience, this is a very uncomfortable subject.
Mm-hmm.
When we've talked about it with family offices, what we say is that the principal takes a trip to Mount Kilimanjaro and he's away for a month, so as to not deal with potential for death. How do you approach this to the family leaders, that this is important to do, and the intensity that you need to bring to the table to make sure that everyone understands what their roles and goals are?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of activity within any family enterprise that needs to be addressed both on the daily level and in making decisions. And some of the things that, really, if the family is not involved with the family office or has limited involvement, they would be at a tremendous disadvantage. They would need to know who to rely on to continue the operations. I think the first step is really establishing stability and to make sure that there could be continuity for the family. And I think it's really asking the questions: what would happen if this person was no longer in the picture? Who would take on the roles and responsibilities that they have? How would transactions be executed? In many families, the patriarch or the key person is controlling a lot of the financial transactions and activities and key decisions. So in that regard, how would they continue that in the absence of such a void? Do they have plans in place? Do they have a successor? Do they have alternate signers to be able to execute on behalf of the family? And then the other piece is really informational, is what information would be needed to make decisions? And that's a big piece of this. So during the crisis, when the family is really somewhat incapacitated handling and making sure that they're dealing with the family issues, there should be information gathering and data gathering to allow that whoever that decision maker will be to make effective decisions. So it's really understanding what is the key information that they need to make decisions and whether or not that information is accessible. So in this case, the family does have support from a team that can help them with financial information, understanding what are the assets owned, what are looking at a host of other issues on the financial side. So that would be something that they would need to rely on. And then the other point is this crisis team, what other skill sets do they need? Who's going to be involved? Is it essentially going to be someone with a financial knowledge and expertise and skill set? What other voids is there? There likely will be need to have legal counsel and others involved who can help shed light on the situation and help guide the family through making the right decisions in this case.
So Mark and Gemma, what have you seen done in terms of wire instructions, check signing that are the kind of the backup plan if either an officer or the founder is unable to make decisions or sign?
Usually we see, and Mark can answer this as well, but we usually have more than one person. We would recommend that families have more than one person who can execute on any given account. It could be a substitute authorized signer. It could be someone who's already signing and has authority with the family as well. It's important to have that backup person already in place for a variety of reasons. And to make sure that the documents the bank have that person authorized and that person has access to be able to get information and execute transactions on behalf. So sometimes there exists a durable power of attorney, which may take a little time to get to the bank and have them review and approve. So typically it's very effective to have more than one signer for any given account or a relationship with a bank so that they can actually operate and continue.
So Mark, is the plan communicated to the bank itself, the backup plan, or is it kind of in an envelope that's unsealed at the time of the event?
I think it could go either way, Phil, but I think the best answer is you have your plan laid out, and then you have individuals that are capable of executing. But like Gemma said, there's certain things that are time sensitive. So at least one other person needs to be empowered to make authorized payments during the time period that you're sort of reorganizing. I wanted to make another point if something were to happen of this magnitude, the emotional distress that the family is under is crippling in many cases, and therefore there needs to be a person that's in place that is very competent, that's chosen to be competent, and to take that burden away from the family during that at least 1 month or month and a half or 2 month period of time, so that the matters are handled and they just aren't put aside, especially if there are problems. And in this particular environment, we get the double whammy of there's a huge change in senior level management and guidance, coupled with a economic disaster unfolding for the operating business and for the family office itself to deal with, and the related investments. So if you don't have a plan in place, the amount of time that's required to sort of reorganize yourself could be very devastating to the family from many perspectives.
And,
yeah. I'd like to add,
and banks won't act if
that's exactly right.
So maybe you could talk about that, Mark.
Sure. Well, you know, the banks in an environment like this, in particular, with either let's say it was a retail business, which would be really a very difficult scenario right now. But if you're a commercial real estate holder of retail space, and suddenly people aren't paying their bills, now where is the money coming from? Is there a need to get forbearance from the banks? Who will make the payments? Who is authorized? If those things are not in place as to who would execute these things, you could be paralyzed for quite a bit of time.
Isn't it possible that there's a event of default if the founder passes away or has a problem?
Right. Well, in particular, some businesses, there might be key man clauses in the loans or other documents. Like, you know, let's say they were a hedge fund manager, there would definitively be key person risk here. You know, is there adequate insurance? Is there management that will step into place that's acceptable to the investment community? There are always so many questions that really need to be thought through in a very thorough way before potential events occur. And that, you know, in investment due diligence, which is where I spend quite a bit of my time, this is a key consideration when it comes to what are you investing in, and will that investment business be basically be run the same way or close to the way it was before this event occurred. So, you know, those things need to be thought out from a succession, not just a family office, but a succession planning perspective from a business operational perspective.
Gemma, what about communications to the outside world?
Yeah, so, you know, there's communications within the family, and then there's communications with the advisors, family office employees, business employees, and then third parties. So given the situation and depending on the nature of the family, it may be needed to have really clear and decisive ways of communicating. So just my experience with this type of thing, dealing with families, like there's a lot of people who are out there who may hear about a situation and are kind of standing there waiting to act and understanding that there's a crisis for the family. They want to support the family, but they're really just in this holding pattern because they don't have clear direction on what they're allowed to do and what they can't do. So that's an example of how it is important to have someone who has the blueprint for this plan and can communicate with the necessary advisors and participants so that they can act and be able to be as effective as possible to help the family. You know, there's in a family business or operation, there could be public information that needs to be communicated to customers, to clients, to investors. So I think there has to be some thought as to, number one, what is going to be communicated, how will it be communicated, And then will that communication vary depending on the different teams involved, whether it's the employee, the investors, or the family business counterparties. So there's cases when, as Mark mentioned, the family is under extreme stress and is really consumed by dealing with the medical emergency or the grieving process, and may not be the best equipped to deal with these communications. So it may be important to evaluate who those people would be, whether on the financial side, who's going to communicate financial information, on the personal side, who's going to communicate with the family members on the situation, and then in general, to the investment community and others outside of the family. It may be necessary to hire a professional public relations group to help with that communications, depending on the situation.
So if we were to assume, and in our example here, we had a brother and a sister, and the question becomes, and both of them, one was involved in the business and another one was involved in the private foundation. If the sister was involved with the private foundation, she might not necessarily be that involved with the family office, but she might again. And there might be strong personalities, so you don't want to have a fight amongst the people remaining, the family members remaining, over who is going to do what. You should try to make it clear so that they could each focus on where they can add the most value and strength. And that might be, one is on the family business and another one is focusing on the family office, or vice versa. Or maybe they are very geared to work together to do that. But if it's sort of assessed, if you will, I think the result can be a lot better, where there isn't this feeling that one person or another should step into the fray.
So I could ask this question to both of you. Many of the family members have never even met any of the individuals working in the family office. How do they go about trusting them to have their best interests in their own mind and to create some kind of alignment?
Yeah, I mean, and that's situation recently I dealt with a family. It's the relationships are not sometimes with the family members themselves, but I believe, through that relationship with that key person, I think there is some trust that can be built, knowing that group had, or that individual had supported the family. So it's important to know who are the go-to people. And I think in terms of that relationship building, if you had the 2020 vision and we're looking back, it's important to have them involved with relationships, to know these people, to meet with them, and to be part of meetings and other events, in planning for such an event. One of my family office clients, they have recently gotten their spouse involved with quarterly meetings to review financial information, to listen to the questions that are raised, to look at the different components and of who does what, understand the flow of information, understand roles and responsibilities. And that's not something that you can absorb and understand in a very short time frame. So when you have the ability to plan for these things, it's important to bring whoever these key decision makers are into the information zone, so that they will be able to understand more about the enterprise, the organization, entities, and the key roles and responsibilities that they're going to have to play, and what they're going to need to carry out those roles. So trust is really not something you can just build overnight. It takes time. So the more interaction that they have with these individuals, the better it will be for them to really develop that trust.
So one issue is, of course, and we have these two case studies as a side-by-side, for instance, but the one huge advantage of having a family office is that there is institutional knowledge with the family office executives so that your information is more readily available, and also knowledge of particular things that have occurred historically, or things that may be even troublesome or just need to be dealt with on an ongoing basis. At least there's some knowledge there to make the transition into the new phase of the family. It won't be seamless for sure, but it will be a lot easier to execute.
So who's at the table in the simulation? How do you figure out who should be there? And how do you get the executives on board that this is something that is important?
Go ahead, Gemma, because we just had this, for instance, in real life.
Sure.
So you can
Yeah,
talk
and
exactly
in this,
on that point.
yes, and in this case, I would think in the example that we're providing, that the person who's leading the outsourced relationship with the family is a key person that is, will have a lot of information, has a team to provide support and be able to provide resources to the family. So that person will likely be a good person in the crisis team. In addition to that, you'd want to have advisors represented. It doesn't mean they have to be, central to the crisis team, but they need to be available to the crisis team. And usually you'd want to get your legal support team involved to understand more about the information, the legal aspects of the organization, the agreements, the trusts, and other matters, so that you can effectively understand what can be done, what should be done, who has the power to do those things, and what are the legal ramifications. So having legal representation, and usually most families have that, whether it's with a family business, they will have a family attorney for that, as well as a trust and estate expert that they deal with, who may have been involved with an estate planning exercise. So they're a resource. Whether or not they'll be on the crisis team really depends on their existing interaction with the family, their bandwidth, and their ability to help the family through this situation. But I would say that you need a leader. You need someone who's going to pull together all of these disparate pieces of information and objectives and tasks, and really lead that charge to get them through the crisis. And that would be someone who has the experience or bandwidth working on a host of areas in the for financial matters, investments, knowledge of the family's investments, and key issues surrounding the investments, knowledge obviously of legal matters, trust and estate issues, and then as well as any philanthropic matters that the family wants to address. So it's someone who's going to sort of quarterback it, but also within the crisis team, resources to be able to address these issues. And sometimes, without adequate planning, really everybody's kind of waiting for the family to act and to give direction, when they're really not in a position to do that in times of crisis like this. So I think it's really whoever is that person that has the most interaction with the family, has most of the pieces of the puzzle, will be sort of that person that would most likely rise up to take on that role.
And I'm sorry, Phil.
So say, Mark, you've also talked about Plan B.
Yeah.
What's Plan B?
Well, Plan B might be that the best laid plans of who would run things is not working out, and Plan B might be we need to transition to maybe a state of affairs that's later on in the process. But Plan B would be so difficult to execute if things aren't working out, that it's going to be very, very messy. you know, and but the sort of moving on and making, if I think Plan B has to be implemented if decisions can't be made and things literally are stagnant. So there is probably a need for a family member to then intercede to make a change at that point in time. And so the question becomes, again, is that someone from the family office that sort of starts to talk to the family members about making that move or not? Probably that's the closest thing to Plan B. But Plan B is not a good scenario.
In the essence of time, we're going to transition to a second case study in a second. For either Gemma or Mark, just so my audience could even grasp it and understand it a little better. And we're very fascinated by these tabletop simulations and exercises, and COVID-19 presents an opportunity for many things in finance and banking and operational and talent that unfortunately could go wrong and be disastrous. If you're engaging initially more with the family, how much detail do you give the other participants, whether advisors or SFO executives, leading into that meeting? I'm assuming, of course, they need a heads up and maybe a basic framework, but if you give them too much, then it gives them, it's naturally only human to want to look as good as possible and to probably overly prepare, but it's not real. You're just looking optically good. So how do you balance that? How much should they know if it's led by the family leading into the tabletop exercise?
That's a good question.
Yes, that's
a really good question.
Yeah, no, that's a big issue because, you know, with any family, there's sensitivity to confidentiality, to privacy, and, you know, there's generally not a lot of information that's provided unless it's more on a need to know basis. Does this person need to know the plan, and what do they need to know to be able to effectively deal with a situation? So I really feel like it's really about defining everybody's role and what their responsibilities are, and what they need to know will follow suit. So for example, if it's someone who's going to be involved with financial decisions, it's really important for them to fully see the picture of what's going to be inputs into that family, those decisions. You know, they have to understand the financial operations to at least in some form, so that they can make effective decisions. They may need to look at sources of liquidity and other information. So I think it really depends on the role as to what exactly they need to know. And you're right, not everybody's going to have the same level of information, but it does need to parse out in an efficient way so that they can help the family and do the right thing.
And in general, would you say a tabletop exercise, that initial gathering, getting together, in theory, at a tabletop, but in today's world, it could be done virtually, just like we're doing now in Zoom. Should you factor 3 hours, half a day? Is that generally about right?
I think it's probably more, yeah, I mean, you probably need to start with the initial meeting, and it could be an hour, a couple of hours, where you identify the issues and then come back when people have had a chance to really evaluate and think about it. It might be more than a one-stage process, I would imagine it would be. And then some issues are going to pop up surrounding each of the topics, whether it's you know, governance and succession issues. There's going to be things that come up as a result of those conversations. So you want to be able to have enough time and put enough thought into addressing those issues. So I think it's a series of meetings and discussions, I think, that need to take place.
And whether, yes, Mark.
As we all know, each family is very, very unique in the personalities and the skill sets of the people in the family, and how they interact with one another. And in a way, some of the questions and interfaces with the advisors should almost be slightly pre-planned, if you will, where what are the questions I need to find the answer to in order to sort of move the ball along. And I think because of that, that takes a little more time. I would recommend that you have sort of multiple sessions, maybe even slightly shorter, in order to put that all together and be more effective.
So it sounds like, to answer your question, Angelo, it sounds like you need a facilitator.
Yeah.
Because in this tabletop simulation, you're going to actually have the people that would be involved. And the simulation itself would be the event, and then how they act around the table, what they do, what the responsibilities are. So I think that you need someone to basically guide it and review it after you see what's worked and what hasn't worked. Right, Mark?
Yeah, I agree, Phil. And, you know, I think it's valuable to commit things to writing, to just solidify your thoughts and to be able to share those thoughts so everyone understands them. You can talk a lot about things and sort of agree about upon a lot of things, but if you don't sort of commit it to writing, I think you might sometimes wander off and not get to the essence of the problems and the conflicts.
Yeah, those are excellent points, and it may be tempting for the head of the family office to enact these kind of exercises internally. And absolutely, as being a leader, planning for things that could go wrong and be devastating, that is wonderful. But nothing is going to be, again, an outside set of eyes. We all have blind spots, an independent, quote unquote, third party, mainly to facilitate, to bring up things that you may not realize because, again, you know, you're too close to it. And, you know, the family is bringing on the SFO and the executives because they have character, they have work ethic, they have a skill set. It's just that sometimes in the tiny fragmented world of family enterprises and family offices, it just gets too siloed. There's not enough sharing of trends and best practices, and it makes it difficult to continually expand your skill set and your capability. This is really an opportunity for the SFO executive to grow. I don't want them to look at it as an exercise that's a negative. It's an ultimate when they're actually the one that's bringing it to the family committee, the board, the family itself, saying, hey, I think we would all benefit from this. It's going to cost some money. You know, no one's going to do this extensive exercise for free, but it's going to be beneficial to all of us. Let's move on to the second case study. So the first one you gave was a little more of a formal family office structure. I know the second example is going to be very common. It still is going to be a very, very affluent family, but they may not have the formal infrastructure of a family office. But again, many, many things could go wrong, and there's many challenges out there. Gemma, I'll kick it off to you to give the overview.
Sure. Yeah, so the second case is the Smith family with an informal family structure. So we're talking about Sarah Smith, who's a 50-year-old second generation family member with children. She happens to be divorced. She sits on the board of the family's fashion business with her 52-year-old brother and 75-year-old father. The brother is the successor to the family business and operationally. The family owns a diverse set of investments, multiple homes, has many investments and counterparties, and has no formal family office. However, their CFO, who's the CFO of the family business, is providing support to the family and sort of acts as the de facto family office. However, doesn't have the full picture of all of the holdings and assets. They have an assistant and a family transactional lawyer. In this scenario, the father and brother become sick after visiting a show in Milan, and they both end up being hospitalized and succumbing to COVID, so they are out of commission. And meanwhile, you have Sarah, who is left holding the reins of the family business, all of the family responsibilities, while she's grieving and managing through this loss and supporting her mother, who's not really involved with the family. So in this case, there is no real formal family infrastructure, and so it's in that way they're definitely at a disadvantage in how to respond and what their go forward plan will be. It's based on the scenario, they do have a CFO who is very knowledgeable about the business, has some information, and can provide support. But there clearly is a major gap in terms of what the loss of the brother and the father are. And this is definitely a situation that would, obviously need to be planned to be more effective. But the family business is at risk now. The family investments are at risk without someone managing and coordinating. So it's really, how do they go about figuring out who would be supporting that family in this situation? And I think, usually when you're in such situations, you look at the person who has most of the information. I would think the CFO is going to be a lead person in the case with their financial experience and ability. And then working with the family attorney, they can work together to start the ball rolling and get a crisis response put in order. But if, looking back and creating an environment where this would be more adequate planning, it would mean that they should really, evaluate whether they need more infrastructure and have some family office resources, whether it's a multifamily office or create a higher level person within the family office that can really help them pull together and manage these aspects of their situation.
That would be a more likely situation where the principals are the only check signers, where the mail is coming to one office. What are the suggestions you'd make in a tabletop exercise to deal with that? It's such a sensitive area also. Someone that doesn't want to give up control, how do you deal with that?
Well, anticipating that this, will happen, you really need to have alternate signers in place, and determine who those signers will be is really important. The other alternative would be to have powers of attorney, so the next in line would be able to sign and authorize transactions. But it's essentially really identifying who those people are and making plans to allow them to currently allow them to have access and to understand what their role would be in a situation should something like this happen. So time is of the essence, and as we spoke before, having signature cards and bank documents and approvals put in place could take weeks, if not longer. So it's really important to get that ball rolling and to plan ahead to allow for alternate signers to be in place.
Mark, what about the introduction of the trustees of a trust to the other parties and their relationship to a simulation? How would that work?
Yeah, well, Phil, just in general, there are so many. We had this scenario with a dual death. There's so many problems that are suddenly in place where you probably couldn't anticipate this, but you're effectively triggering the execution of certain trusts and money movements, and also powers or philanthropic activities are occurring. And now we have a multi-generational scenario where if other family members aren't familiar with the trustees and the wishes of those that are no longer of this world, if you will, it would become very legalistic, if you will, and very much a reading of the documents rather than an understanding between the trustees and the family members. So in order to avoid a really difficult scenario, there would need to be meetings with the trustees over time rather than sort of have an isolation. Now, the instance you bring up where maybe there's a very high-powered patriarch who isn't a share of information, you really need to get a family lawyer involved to sort of sort their way through that scenario. I don't know of any other way you could do it because there wouldn't be a clear understanding there other than what is written in the trust documents. So I could see that as being very problematic. And another thing that happens is sometimes the way the family is set up, especially with its investment structure, each trust, even though it legally stands on its own, there might have been historically many relationships between, let's say, the patriarch or matriarch's trusts and the children's trust or the grandchildren's trust, or even the family business. Family business could be held in trust. So if you lost both people who are involved in the business and you didn't have here's a plan B, if you didn't have a strong executive in that business, then there's really nakedness, if you will, in the ability to run and operate the business. And there could also be extreme pressure on behalf of either investors or the banks in regard to the family business. And maybe most of the family wealth is in the family business. So I know these are super difficult scenarios to even perceive of, but at least if there are some plans there that encompass these complex pieces of the puzzle, then there will be some thoughts in a go for it as to what to do.
So two other questions. Number one is location of documents. What type of information should be provided for location of documents when you've had multiple attorneys over a period of time? And the second is whether or not you've seen people create a liquidity fund just in case, just sitting there waiting for any kind of emergency.
Sure.
Gemma, I refer to you.
Sure. Documents are that just the practical issues are, you may have documents, but are they the most recently executed documents? Have they even been executed? Are they drafts? And who has them? And really that's important to really understand and know. And it's especially important for the family because if they don't have access to the information, they're really incapacitated for a period of time until someone finds the documents. And then, with multiple versions, it could really put some question into whether or not those are the final documents and the important documents. So, you need to know where the wills, the trusts, the powers of attorney, the healthcare proxies, the living trusts, the Hippa sign-offs, all of these documents should be centralized in a place that is accessible to the key people that will need to use them. And if there are updates, they need to be communicated. So really it's something that's an ongoing issue that should be addressed. In a lot of cases, a key attorney is holding the documents or has the most recently updated. So they're a good place to start. But it's important that copies are available when needed to the people that will need to use them. And certainly a review of the documents to make sure that that any of the nuances are understood and that the people in charge of executing and their roles and responsibilities now as part of this transition will have the right information and to rely on.
Yeah.
So Mark,
Phil, on the investment question, right? I think a time like this really drives it home that when you do have your investment portfolio, you at a minimum have to have at least a year, if not 2 years, of cash available to operate as a family. And so therefore you need to do some cash projections and not overexpose yourself to liquid investments where you would either have an issue of funding them or that just to, an event occurs like an economic event where you can lean on those funds in times of distress. And this would clearly, even if there wasn't a COVID issue, this would clearly be a time of distress for the family where you would need to lean on those funds. And so when you're designing the portfolio with your investment advisor, that should be a key consideration. One of my biggest clients, one of my wealthiest clients, they basically created a set of rules regarding how the family wealth would have to be run, and they would have to check in with them annually about the status of certain items. And one of those was a clear liquidity reserve as an essential way to run the family.
Another thing that we may lose sight of is the fact that a lot of these, the wealth are in partnerships. And those partnerships have successor partners, successor managers that may have been created a long time ago. And now that you have children that are majors, Gemma, what have you seen in that area?
Yeah, no, that's a common issue is, over a period of a few years, the children become older and are maybe more capable of participating in the operations. But essentially, you'll see successors named, but the question, and very often they could be a spouse or family member. So it's good to understand who those people are and whether you need to supplement them for reasons of whether or not they, number one, are have the bandwidth and the experience to manage that role, and whether or not there should be additional members that are in that place to make decisions in a go-forward way. So it's really important as part of this whole exercise is not only to create the plan and understand it, but also to update over, periodically review what is the situation now, who's going to be involved, are they still available, is there new people that need to be involved, are the children ready to assume some, leadership role in the family businesses and organization structure, and are the trustees, trustees available and able to fulfill their roles as well.
Yeah, the partnerships are a particular problem, and I've been involved not only our own partnership now at O'Connor Davies, but in other businesses that I've been in. Being a minority partner isn't necessarily a fun thing. And, the majority partner has an awful lot to say about what happens. Now, if you're the majority partner and there's some succession going on, there are issues there also that who's going to be capable to lead, even though you might be able to make the calls. Do you have sufficient skill sets to do that? Do you need to bring other people into that particular business? But there are also if there are friendships and then now one of the partners dies, maybe the remaining partners will feel that the only reason they were there was because of the partnership they had for many years, and therefore they want to either sell the business or move on in other ways. So there's so many dynamics in here that you can't anticipate, but you could ask yourself the question on all those key assets or key partnership relationships, how do you want them to go over time? And we all age out, and what is the succession plan on that business if there needs to be one?
And I guess the beauty of what you're talking about in terms of tabletop is a person that is the wealth creators. They're there to basically oversee how things are going to go and to change things if they're not the way they would like them to be.
Right.
Yeah, those are great examples. And you're correct, Phil. Before the problems play out is the best time to understand what they could be and address them, because they're not necessarily happening in real time. It's a chance to take that event, and your response helps to determine the outcome. And the acronym, by the way, is ERO. Learned that from a guy named Tim Kite. Great teacher. A couple of quick questions. Maybe it relates a little bit more to the first scenario of a more formal single family office, but it basically regards polymath would be too strong a word, but diverse skill sets. So how do you have, in case someone goes down, a backup? Does that relate to having processes and written policy and procedures, and almost for some circumstances exactly laying out, if this person goes down and they handle this, here's what to do that the backup person should know? Some things could be too rigid that way, and this is the balance between quantitative and qualitative. How much do you have that's written and somewhat set in stone until it's not? And how much do you rely on people to be right-brained and creative and adapt? And this goes back a little bit to the great philosopher Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan, although literally not everyone, but let's go with it. Everyone has a plan until they get hit. So now the problem happens. Do you just simply rely on what's written in policy and procedures? But how do you have human ingenuity and creativity meld into that and be a part of the solution?
Yeah, I mean, those are all really good points, Angelo, in terms of not only having the ability and the authorization, but to be able to actually carry out that role. And it is really important to understand the logistics of it. And that is somewhat changes over time. So even if you do define it and write it out, then you will often have to update it when there are changes in structures or people or team members. So I think it's best to go through scenarios and really talk through what would happen if, and how would I do this, and go through the logistics of it to really address those issues and understand what needs to be in place and how much needs to be predefined versus created on the fly in the situation. So for example, you bring in someone to take over authorization functions within a family office to execute transactions, and that person currently doesn't have access. So you have to think about how you're going to get them access. Do you want to have them in the background as an authorized additional signer so that when the event happens, they'll be ready to go? What information and access do they need? Do they need to have access to online bank accounts, financial information? What are the processes in place now to execute those roles? So, they would now have to be interfacing with the existing team, and how would they interface with that team, and how would it change from what is happening now? So those things all are practical matters that need to be addressed and thought out, and also, considered when you have to figure out how to actually get things done in the aftermath of such an event. So the running scenarios and documents is very important. And then obviously sharing that information with the people who are going to be involved at the appropriate time is also really important as well.
Again, I'll go back to this one, for instance, because it's the best laid out plans that I've seen, where it's a very famous investor, and he left quite a bit of money to philanthropy. And how would the philanthropic organization function over time? But he laid out some basic principles and then some basic procedures, but he allowed for the sort of, let's call it a board, to modify those positions as circumstances and facts and the basic environment changes. So over a 12-year period that I've been involved with this, I've seen it morph in different ways. There's sort of a common theme, but the things do change, so it can't be in stone. The other advantage of that is, if there is no family member or no family office executive to step into a role. If it's somewhat defined, at least you could find someone to step into that role, either temporarily or for a at least an interim period of time. And at least there's some concept around what needs to be done and to fill that responsibility.
Yes, Phil.
One other thing that I wanted to ask Gemma, what about the fact that the designated individual being charged doesn't want to be accountable to their brothers and sisters? Do you ever see that situation?
I haven't seen where they don't want to be accountable. It's more like, there's some issues between who's making decisions and how the decisions are being made. But essentially, I think that's part of the idea of planning for this and having the understanding that the person who assumes that role will, be accountable. And that's essentially any leadership position requires you to be accountable. So that has to be an important part of selecting that person or people who are going to play those roles. Obviously managing a family's wealth, leading the family office or leading a business has tremendous amount of responsibility, but accountability is a key. And it's really to provide, it's important for them to understand what that and how they will fulfill that accountability, whether they're a trustee, what information do they need to do, what are their responsibilities in that role, and how do they communicate with the beneficiaries and the other trustees to fulfill that role.
Yeah, does the family stay together after an event like this is a big concern. So if the family gets along well, it's unlikely that there will be a change. But if they don't all get along well or they're disparate parts, then the family can break into its various components. We've been talking to some families lately where it goes on for a while, but then it doesn't work well because a particular family member, that maybe they're running the family in a way that they don't like. They would take it from their father or mother, but they don't want to take it from their sibling. And then all of a sudden there's this strong will to separate the family wealth and the way the family is run. And each scenario is a little different, but there are definite push-pull and conflict matters to resolve when events happen. And just because you make up a plan doesn't necessarily mean that your plan goes as you would like it to go.
Right.
I would say it almost never does. And Phil's question relates a little bit from one of the chat feature questions that came in from one of our live attendees who might have had a follow-up relatively relating to co-executor trustee that really doesn't desire the role that which they were appointed. I mean, you hope beforehand that there's a agreement that it's valuable and they're a good fit for that role. But that's a difficult one. That's sometimes not a black or white answer. And you guys may see it in the chat feature as well. And you kind of addressed it via the way Phil asked it about 5 minutes ago, but any further comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, trustees, that's an area. It's very sometimes families have a challenge finding the right people who that have the experience and also want to have that role. So, there's a lot of reluctant trustees out there who are doing it out of responsibility to family members or for other reasons. But I think it's important to understand if they clearly don't want that role, then really it's important to find some alternative and create some kind of additional support there and get through that process because that is such an important role, and it's not really, it wouldn't do anybody any good for them not to be fully engaged in that.
There's always the debate of whether or not the trustee should be an attorney, a family friend, or a corporate trustee. Is there a fairness issue, and therefore we should have an independent corporate trustee? But does the corporate trustee understand the dynamics of the family? These are very common issues that are very difficult to resolve at times.
So, Angelo, to answer your question, I think the simulation would bring to bear the responsibilities, accountabilities, and also the experience of all the people that would come, be part of that. We've worked with many advisory groups where there's 3 or 4 advisors that are in place beforehand that bring the family up to speed on governance and expertise. It's always good to have those in place before, God forbid, something happens.
And we only have a couple of minutes left before we conclude, and I hate to end a little bleakly, but earlier in the COVID crisis, I did a video that Phil was very complimentary of, and basically one of my throwaway lines in it, and again, it's a little bleak, but it's going to relate a little bit to the tabletop and some of the things we're talking about. There are times when even the wealthiest families with amazing single family offices, they outsource to the family office like everything in their life. And they lose a little bit attachment, not only to how the humble beginnings, the entrepreneurship, the struggles, how wealth was created, but how to do simple things like balance a checkbook, to do simple requests for things around the house, to understand, what do we own and how liquid are we? What I'm getting to is if a disaster happens that's really bad, a nuclear war, something that is really devastating, with all respect, we have to realize the single family office executive is going to look out for their own interest and their own family, given that devastating scenario that would be happening in the horrific example that I'm giving. In other words, what I'm getting to is inevitably at the end of the day, the buck stops with the family for the success of their family office. It's their responsibility to instill and inspire greatness in the family office, but also, damn it, they need to be able to do some things themselves. There needs to be some self-reliance and understanding, what do we own? What do we have? How do we make decisions as a family where if something goes terribly, terribly wrong, we're not going to be totally blindsided by it, because unfortunately the executive must be focused on their family, which I would understand if it's something as horrific as I'm describing. I don't know if there's a great answer for that. It's probably more of a comment than a question, but feel free to follow up on that comment.
I'm not sure how to handle.
Yeah, that's a rough one. I'm sorry. It's a little bit of a.
I mean, I would say fortunately, there are resources, to replace some of the functions of the family office. If, disaster occurs and there really aren't, the people that are taken down as well. But there's always that time issue where there's an emergency to get somebody else in place to make the right decisions, to find the right people. You're right. There has to be some ownership of responsibility for those that are most interested, dependent on that family office. I think the more interaction and involvement in understanding what the roles and responsibilities are of the family office, and really education for family members, really understanding what is done, how is it done, and really providing a way for them to learn about the functions of the family office would be really, really helpful. And it could be just, an annual meeting with the family office to present what they are doing, how they do it, what are the issues and challenges they're facing, what are their needs, and it kind of would give the family a better sense of how it's run, what's the key information that they need to know about it, and should they be forced to deal with these issues in this disaster scenario, how would they go about it? And a lot of times when we first meet with a family, they may be unwinding from a larger family office, and they're really out there trying to figure out how to go about it. What are the issues to address? Who are the people out there that can help them? And there's a tremendous amount of learning and research going on. So I think there's also resources in organizations like Family Office Association and some others that can really help guide the family in understanding and reacting to these situations. But again, when you're in a crisis, time is of the essence. And sometimes when you don't have the time, you make bad decisions, and it has negative consequences.
Of course. On that note, Gemma and Mark, for those that have an interest in reaching out to you and your wonderful firm, how could they learn more about that, and how could they connect with you?
Well, I guess we can send out an email with our contact information. So Mark and I work very closely at PKF O'Connor Davies, working with families of wealth, managing financial issues, clients, financial reporting, accounting, and day-to-day matters, including project management. So we do have a great team that we work with within the firm, and a really phenomenal group of advisors that on the outside that support our clients as well. So if you have any questions or issues or any concerns, you feel free to contact us, and we'll, Angelo, I'm not sure if you're going to provide our contact information, or you have.
It would be good if you wanted to share your and Mark's email, because then the
Sure.
podcast audience could hear it.
Okay, great. So it's Gemma, G. Leddy, GLEDDY at pkfod.com. And my direct line is 914-341-7073.
So M. Rinaldi, RINALDI, at pkfod.com. My direct line is 203-470-7644.
And Phil, for those that would like to learn more about the work that you're doing in consulting and other work among the single family office community, how could they learn more or connect with you?
Sure. Call me at 516-729-5555. My email address is Philip, PHILIP, .Strassler, STRASSLER, at Strassler, LLC, LuckyLuckyCharlie.com.
Excellent, Phil. Thank you so much. And from my perspective, in closing, everyone, I am Angelo Robles, host of Angelo Robles' Effective Family Office podcast and founder and CEO at Family Office Association, a global membership organization dedicated to families of great success and their single family offices, providing unique proprietary content, our podcasting, social media, hundreds of research and white papers, my books, and other sources of proprietary information, really all geared around success of generational families, family offices, and lately the trends in the virtual family office. We also host a lot of events. The physical events are a bit on hold for obvious reasons with COVID-19, but we're doing a tremendous amount effectively every day, daily online video meetings, and also private meetings with peer-to-peer with the families only, and a variety of other newer services that we recently rolled out or soon to roll out. It's been a hyper-creative period for us. We also have a private online forum for our members to communicate and for us to share certain proprietary information from other resources and special opportunities to our members as well. Very active on social media, Family Office Association on Instagram, Family Office Association as the company, on LinkedIn, my own personal name, LinkedIn as well, website, FamilyOfficeAssociation.com, and likely preferred email, Angelo at FamilyOfficeAssociation.com. Thank you all to our special guests. Thank you to our live audience, and those of you that watch it on YouTube or see it on a podcast, we hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much for viewing or listening in. Everyone have a great day.